Well, good evening and welcome to today's webinar on transforming the COVID crisis into opportunities. We are going through something which is unprecedented in modern history, where our very survival is at stake, figuratively and otherwise as well. While we will not dwell into the dangers of COVID-19 on our health and lives, the impact, there is hope at the end of the tunnel. Hopefully there's light at the end of the tunnel with the vaccines and alternative medicines that are coming forth, which will take some time, but at least there is some light at the end of the tunnel there. Where we have to really worry is the economic fallout of this crisis, which is unprecedented, even from the Great Depression of the 1930s and 40s, which shook the world at that stage. Just to give you an idea that what these 3 to 4 months have resulted in the economic scenario is that till date, Victoria's Secret has declared bankruptcy. Zara's has closed around 1,200 stores. Chanel, Hermes are in trouble. Luxury brands such as Patek Philippe and Rolex have discontinued production. The world's luxury industry has totally crumpled. Nike has a total of 23 billion US dollars prepared for letting the second stage of layoffs. Gold's Gym has filed for bankruptcy. The founder of Airbnb has said that because of this pandemic, 12 years of efforts were destroyed in just 6 weeks. Starbucks has also announced a permanent closure of 400 of their stores. WeWorks is not doing better either. Big marquee companies such as Nissan may close down in the US. Hertz, Comcar, JCPenney have filed for bankruptcy. The Oracle of Omaha, Warren Buffett, has lost $50 billion in the last 2 months. BlackRock has signaling a disaster in the world economy. They manage over $7 trillion in assets, and the list goes on. So it is a very, very difficult scenario, even in India, where the very existence of small and medium-sized companies is at a very crucial juncture, where we have not been able to even pay the salaries of so many of our staff, or be paid partly. We don't know where this is going to end. And it is a crisis of unprecedented proportions. However, sometimes and always, in fact, in these kind of crises emerges an opportunity as well. And there have been various scenarios where people have taken advantage of this crisis and have turned it upside down in their favor. Today, we have a very eminent personality, Mr. Richard Rothman, who is a personal friend of mine as well, going to speak on this pandemic and how to make the most of it and turn this crisis, grave crisis, into an opportunity. Just to give you a brief introduction, for over 32 years, Richard has identified and expanded business opportunities for hundreds of companies around the world in 67 sectors. His Indian consulting clients include Z Entertainment, Onida, Aptech, Metro Shoes, and SL Propack. He is the founder and managing director of Open Mind Opportunity Consultancy. His first book, Master Opportunities and Make It Big, won big acclaim and was a national bestseller. His latest book, The Power of Opportunity, was recently published, in fact, I think during the pandemic or just before that, by Penguin Random House. Prior to starting his consultancy, Richard served as Trade Commissioner of the United States in India, Italy, and Indonesia. As Trade Commissioner, his numerous clients included Indian majors such as Reliance, Tata's, Mahindra, and Godrej, Indonesian conglomerates such as Astra, Sampoerna, Salim Group, and Lippo, as well as Fortune 500 companies such as Boeing, International Paper, General Electric, and Exxon. He also services the needs of
I think frozen up. Xerxes.
And was a facilitator for the Harvard Business School Corporate Training Unit in Asia. He holds a BA from Bates College and an MBA from California State University, and MA International Management from Thunderbolt School of Global Management. So ladies and gentlemen, I give you Richard to.
Hello? Xerxes, I'm not hearing you. Have we lost Xerxes?
I think so.
Okay, then I'll thank you, Xerxes. I don't know if you can hear me, but I will proceed to share the screen with my presentation. I want to thank all of you for coming today. The Parsi community is without a doubt my favorite community in India. And it's a great pleasure to be with you today. And I'm going to be sharing the screen with my presentation. So let's do that and we can start. Okay, so this is the wrong presentation. Sorry about that. Let me just find the right one.
Richard, did you hear me before when I said everything? Was I clear?
Yeah, until the end.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, there was a slight drop in the internet. So go ahead, Richard, the floor is yours.
No problem, I'm just loading my presentation.
Yeah.
So today we're going to talk about transforming the COVID crisis into opportunity, 4 key lessons. Can everyone hear me? Can you hear me, Xerxes?
Yeah,
Yes,
loud and clear.
I can hear
Loud
you,
and-
Richard.
Lovely. Okay, everyone can hear me. That's fine. Just wanted to make sure. Okay, so I'm sure most of you are aware that the Chinese word for crisis is written with 2 characters, one for danger and one for opportunity. So the question that everyone has to face is, what will the crisis be for you? Will it be a danger or will it be an opportunity? It could be either or both. For a few companies, the crisis has been an opportunity just because they were in the right place at the right time. Zoom is the best example. Their usage has gone up from 10 million users to 300 million overnight without having to do anything. But for most of us, we really aren't lucky. And we have to really decide whether we're going to be a victim or a victor of this crisis. We have the choice. We can allow the danger to overwhelm us and destroy value in our businesses and our lives, or we can seize opportunities and create value. So lesson 1, I'd like to talk a little about what creates opportunities. I've thought a lot about this. Obviously, I've written a couple of books on it. So in a very simple way, I want to explain what opportunity is and how it's created. Opportunities are created by change in your environment. Basically, if the environment was completely static, there wouldn't be opportunities. And we're very fortunate to live in the modern world where there's a lot of change, and that creates a lot of opportunity. A lot of people fear change and don't like it, but actually, if you look at it from the right perspective, it's very positive and it creates opportunities. Here's an example using a product we all have, a mobile phone. Years ago, we all had a phone like the Nokia on the top left, a feature phone, and then we rather quickly migrated to a BlackBerry. And then a few years ago, we all moved on and got a smartphone. Now, what was the change in the environment that drove this evolution from the feature phone to the BlackBerry to the smartphone? Most people can't guess it, but the key driver of change was not something from within the mobile phone industry, it was from the telecom industry. And the change that drove this evolution was bandwidth. With a 1G phone, you could, like the Nokia, you could have only phone calls and SMSs. With a 2G phone like the BlackBerry, you could add email. But as soon as bandwidth went to 3G, you were able to add a networked computer to the phone and literally expand utility by 1,000 times. So Nokia did not see this key driver of change, did not benefit from it, and got wiped out. Same with BlackBerry. And
we can't see your presentation, please. You'll have to project your presentation.
Sorry?
Is the presentation on?
Why, you're not seeing it?
No, it's not shared.
Oh my God. Just hold on. Just hold on. The share screen is not working properly. Hold on. Let me try it again.
But I think, Richard, you are speaking, so we can hear you quite clearly. You can go ahead.
No. Can you see my presentation now?
Yes. Yes,
Excellent.
absolutely.
Okay, very sorry about that. Okay, so you heard that, and I'm sure you all know what these phones look like. So an example of a company that did seize opportunity of bandwidth and did adapt to change was Netflix. Netflix started out as a DVD mail delivery company where, at the time when we used to watch movies and TV shows on DVDs. But as soon as 3G streaming became available, they quickly switched to a streaming model. They were the first ones to do it. People thought they were crazy, but as a result, they've become the market leader and very successful. And obviously, if they hadn't switched to streaming, they would have been wiped out as well, since nobody uses DVD players anymore. So how about this crisis? Well, the key driver of change for everyone in the world is the virus. It's probably the only time in history where the key driver of change is the same for everyone. So it's the virus and nothing else. And so in order to see, evaluate, and choose opportunities, we must first understand the dangerous environment created by the virus. It's very essential, which moves us to lesson 2, understanding the virus. Now, I'm very fortunate because my mother for several decades was head of research for Walter Reed Army Institute of Research in Washington. It's the world's leading infectious disease research institute. So she's an expert on viruses, and she's been educating me over the last few months. I obviously knew nothing about viruses before that. And she has taught me 4 key facts about the COVID virus, which everyone should be aware of. First, COVID-19 is currently unstoppable. Why? Because it is a new virus. Nobody has natural immunity to it. That's why it's called a novel coronavirus, because it's a new virus. That's why, and because we have no natural immunity, that's why we're all avoiding each other. Fact 2, because COVID is a virus, there is no cure. Why? Because viruses have never been cured. Think about the common cold. That's a virus. Think about AIDS, that's a virus. There are many, many diseases that they come from viruses, and none of them have ever been cured. Drugs like remdesivir have very limited utility. They're only applicable for people who are already very sick with the virus. So far, we see nothing that can cure this virus. Fact 3, the only way to wipe out viruses is through vaccination. The average vaccine takes 10 years to develop. The quickest any vaccine has ever been developed was 4 years. So a vaccine to be developed within 2 years is a wildly best case scenario. It is not a likely scenario. It's a wildly best case scenario. Only one virus has ever been totally wiped out by a vaccine. That was smallpox. And that process took over 200 years. So, I mean, what you hear when Donald Trump says that the virus is, we're going to have a vaccine by December with 300 million doses, that is, of course, Trump being Trump. There's very little likelihood of that. Fact 4, the only other solution to the pandemic is herd immunity. We've all heard of herd immunity. That's when 90% of the population gets infected, and therefore there's nobody more to infect. We all have heard about flattening the curve. It saves millions of lives because the idea is to increase healthcare system capacity in order to, so we had lockdowns not in order to wipe out the virus, but in order to increase healthcare system capacity so people would not die needlessly. If we had not had lockdowns, the virus would have raged even faster, and a lot of people would have died. So actually, these lockdowns and other measures actually greatly prolong the period in which this virus is rampant. How long does it prolong it? Well, a study done by the University of Minnesota, recently published in the New York Times, estimated that in the US to reach 55% threshold for herd immunity would take until July 2022. And it would be a situation in which you have periods of social distancing, which would then end, and then lockdowns would end, and then of course cases would go up, and then it would happen over and over and over again, which is what we're already seeing happening in places like the US. How bad can it get? Well, the the worst pandemic about 100 years ago was the Spanish flu. It lasted 2 years. Pandemics have a history of lasting about 2 years. The last so many pandemics in the 20th century, of course, which were not as bad as this one, typically lasted 2 years. The second wave of the Spanish flu had 5 times the deaths of the first wave. The third wave was 2.5 times as bad as the first wave. And in India, at least 12 million people died of the Spanish flu, which was at a time when the population was about 1/4 of what it is now. Unfortunately, India's curve is not flattening. If we compare India with, say, Italy and the US, Italy, which had a very high outbreak at the beginning, managed to bend the curve, not just flatten the curve, so that they're down to about 500 cases a day now. And they've been able to do that because of testing, contact tracing, and so on, which is an effective way of actually keeping the curve down. The US managed to flatten the curve somewhat, because they opened up prematurely without proper testing and contact tracing in place. They're again seeing a spike upward. It's not even the second wave, it's just a continuation of the first wave. India, on the other hand, has never flattened at all. They've just had a steady increase, so that the daily number of new cases in India is up approximately 240 times in 14 weeks. So on 23rd March, on the first day of lockdown, India was recording 100 new cases a day. As of yesterday, it was 24,000. I think the day before yesterday was 24,000. Yesterday was 22,000. But you can see that the upward progression continues at a fairly steady pace, which would lead us to believe, since there's been no flattening, that within a month we will see 50,000 plus new cases a day in India, which still means the country has a long way to go, because with a population of 1.4 billion, that's really not that much. I think the real question is whether India can flatten the curve without flattening its economy. That's because red districts make up 41% share of India's economic activities, and obviously India's main urban growth centers like Bombay and Delhi are all red zones. And these cities are obviously not designed for effective social distancing. So one has to wonder when the government in Mumbai will be able to run the trains again as they were before with super dense crush loads, and when business will be able to return to normal. At this point, it doesn't look like anytime soon. And even when economies have opened up, it typically doesn't mean much more than half shut. So even after a very effective campaign against the virus in China, discretionary spending by Chinese consumers is still down about 40%, because people are still scared to venture out on the weekends and go shopping. We heard that Shanghai Disneyland opened and was sold out, but it's only running at 30% capacity. So you have to wonder how many companies can survive at 50% capacity or even 80% capacity, and how many companies can survive repeated lockdowns. So what is the danger of the virus from an economic standpoint? Well, looking at a realistic case, we have to assume the crisis will last for about 2 years, and it will cause massive continued demand destruction, massive supply disruptions, because even if transport works somewhat better, there's still going to be a shortage of supply from many factories due to labor shortages. We're going to see massively reduced and continued massive reductions in consumer and B2B spending, massive sustained unemployment, massively reduced capex, and a massive number of bankruptcies. So what we really have is a global balance sheet crisis. And we have to assume that 10% GDP stimulus the government has announced, which is really more than like 1%, is going to be inadequate to prevent widespread insolvencies. Because even if the government pumps in liquidity, it does not stop SME businesses from going insolvent. That's also the case in the US. Even if the Fed prints lots of money, that doesn't keep small and medium-sized businesses from going bankrupt. So moving on to lesson 3, opportunities to survive. One of my favorite investors is a guy named Howard Marks. He's the founder of Oak Tree Capital. And over the past 40 years, he's always made money in downturns. He's made a lot of money in downturns. And recently he wrote, if you've never experienced something before, you can't say you know how it's going to turn out. Those are very simple words, but I think they're very profound for this crisis. The fact is that, as Xerxes pointed out, I think none of us have ever experienced something like this. We have no existing algorithms in our mind, in our business. We have no patterns to follow that can actually tell us how to react to this crisis. So we're all on kind of an extreme learning curve. It's a remarkably unpredictable situation because we have three unprecedented simultaneous developments. First of all, we have a global pandemic. We have a massive global economic contraction of a scale none of us have ever seen in our lives. And we have a massive debt monetization and fiscal expansion by governments all over the world. We don't know how that's going to turn out. And all three of these things are happening at the same time. So basically, I think the best way of thinking about this for thoughtful, smart people is to be uncertain. Fed Chairman Jerome Powell has described the outlook as highly uncertain and subject to significant downside risks. And he cautioned that economic recovery may not take place until the end of next year. I think one of my favorite guys to follow is Warren Buffett. He spoke at his annual meeting about a month ago, and he called this an unparalleled situation with far too many uncertainties. And he's taking a worst case scenario in mind. So until yesterday, I know it was announced today that he did finally invest some money, but until yesterday, he was sitting on 137 billion in cash, and he was not buying anything. He was selling. He sold his airline stocks and he sold a lot of bank stocks. And now yesterday he bought a gas pipeline, which I think is a pretty smart move. Those companies, I was looking at those companies in gas pipelines are all paying 10% dividends. Another guy I really respect is Uday Kotak, who has been a great survivor and obviously has done very well. I interviewed him for my book, Master Opportunity and Make It Big, and he pointed out the importance of survival. In 1997, he pointed out there were 4,000 NBFCs in India, including his, and only 20 survived the crisis of that year. And to do it, he had to cut his balance sheet by 50%. He said, sustainability is a very important part of the journey. If you can't sustain in the tough times, you won't benefit from the good times. Another guy who survived to thrive, we don't think of it that way, but remarkably enough, was Steve Jobs. In 1996, Apple was weeks away from bankruptcy. He was brought in to save the company, and the first thing he did was cut his product line from 355 computers, there were only computers then, down to 10, and he went out and raised $150 million from Bill Gates, which is one reason Bill Gates is still so rich. Anyways, when people were shocked and said to him, why did you do this? He said, I need to conserve resources to focus them on new opportunities when they come along. And of course, he was very successful at that. So I believe everyone's first priority in business is to focus on opportunities to survive over a 2-year period. And these are what I call internal opportunities mainly. They are revolving around your business mission and your business model. So we must avoid relying on hope as a strategy, as all the people who are currently bidding up stock markets are doing right now. There isn't going to be a V-shaped recovery. It's much smarter, given the limited upside over the next year or two, to prepare for the worst case scenario. We just don't want to bet the future on whether there's going to be a vaccine in 6 months, because there probably won't be. So we need to cut costs and innovate efficiencies. Above all, avoid insolvency by preserving and raising cash. We should cooperate with industry competitors to lobby for relief, and keep in mind that the good times will come after the virus, but you must survive to benefit. And certainly the survivors of this will benefit. Now I'd like to look at a more positive lesson, which are opportunities we can look at to thrive right now. A few years ago, when I was on the teaching staff at Harvard Business School in Asia, I was invited to a lecture by Professor J. Bruce Harold of Harvard, who had done a study of companies all over the world, all sizes, all sectors. And remarkably enough, he had found that only 1.7% of companies last more than 40 years. Now, companies die because the opportunities they pursue all have a life cycle. And over time, change makes opportunities irrelevant. So some opportunities like Coca-Cola might last 100 years, but very few are like that. And many, Czech companies, their opportunities might only last a couple of years. In reaction to change, many companies either choose to stand still, as Kodak did, for example, and get wiped out, or many companies pursue new opportunities that don't adapt to key drivers of change. And I gave the examples of Nokia and BlackBerry, and they get wiped out. The most successful companies choose new opportunities that adapt best to key drivers of change. So how are companies adapting during this crisis? Well, Scootsie is a good example. Some of you may have used Scootsie in the past. It's a food delivery app, high-end. Actually, it's now disappeared as of today. As of July 1st, it's dead. It's over. It's merged with Swiggy. So they didn't adapt very well. They called me a few weeks ago and said, well, we don't just deliver from restaurants anymore. We deliver any which way. If you want to deliver something from your house to anywhere, we'll do it. But then they never followed it up or put it on their app. They didn't do a good job, and they've now disappeared. On the other hand, a company called WeFest, who I've never heard of before, now is doing great business because they do indeed deliver from any point to any point. So if my friend wants to cook some food and deliver it to me, they will do that. And that's been very relevant during the crisis, obviously, because many of us don't have drivers, and many of us are, in a different situation than we were before. A thrive opportunity that many companies can take advantage of right away is by adapting to distance. And especially in your sales and customer service efforts. It's quite clear that the crisis has eliminated the need for in-person selling, and it's demonstrated the efficiency and effectiveness of distance selling and distance servicing. For example, before the crisis, if I wanted to sell my consulting services, first my salesperson had to go meet a managing director personally, meet their team, arrange for me to have a meeting with the managing director of a company. Now that's completely unnecessary. I don't need to have any personal meetings. Nobody has to travel anymore. In fact, nobody wants to meet me personally. Everything can be done over a distance through Zoom or other platforms like this. So it might have been that this adaptation to selling through distance might have taken years to take place. It might have taken 10 years. It would have happened eventually. But this adaptation now has taken months, weeks rather than years, because everyone was forced to do it and they've realized that, hey, this is pretty good. So it's clear that distance selling and distance servicing is bound to be accepted even after the crisis is over. Why? Because it's much easier and much cheaper and much more efficient. And it can be applied not only to B2B companies, but many B2C companies can do it as well. And the other good thing about distance selling is it greatly increases the potential range and scope of your market while cutting costs. For example, previously I was only able to market my consulting services in Mumbai due to the need to meet people personally. Now I can do it anywhere. I've started to market in the US because it's no problem meeting people in the US. Why not? So how can you take advantage of this opportunity? Well, I think it's important for every company that could theoretically use this service to assess the lessons you've learned so far during the crisis period and consider the skills and tools you'll need to adapt. For instance, it's essential to quickly gain the digital infrastructure and skills and processes needed. So I spent $150 for a paid Zoom account. That's no big deal. They're doing most of the heavy lifting. I don't have to write the software. And many of these types of digital tools can be paid for through cost savings. Even if you need new personnel to help you with it, you won't probably need as many of the old personnel. For example, I have a client who sells products to doctors and hospitals. The salesmen, they had 200 salesmen who had to call on doctors personally, which meant a lot of time in transit and a lot of time in waiting rooms. Now that's not necessary. So they can probably get along with half as many salespeople, maybe fewer. So there will be significant cost savings. And keep in mind that if you fail to adapt to distance, you will risk losing sales and customers and become less cost competitive, because the people who do this well will be able to acquire more customers during this period. They'll be ready to sell better afterwards, and they'll run more efficiently than you are. So how can you focus on opportunities to thrive for your business? Well, I think in addition to adapting your business model, it's very important to adapt your mental model. Because in times of unprecedented change, you must be open-minded and irreverent. What do I mean by irreverent? Well, first of all, you must question all your old assumptions about who, what, where, when, and how, and have a learning orientation. There has been a change affecting everyone, and we must learn how to adapt to it. You must strive to understand the consequences of change, for all of your stakeholders, especially your current and potential customers. Why are your customers most important? Well, of course, because they pay you. It's easy in times that are difficult to focus on me, and be self-absorbed, but actually success will come and opportunities are best identified by focusing on how you can be of service to others. You're not the only one facing problems adapting to this new world. Your customers are certainly struggling as well. And you adapt best by helping others to adapt to the new reality. Again, don't assume your customers have the same needs as before. That's a crucial error. Question these assumptions. So you must really look at how can you help your customers to adapt, and what new customers can you help? Don't assume that you know based on your old algorithms or the old types of service that you were giving. A good example, I was contacted a few weeks ago by a company that makes cartons. This company, pre-COVID, 75% of its sales were to large furniture manufacturers like Godrej. So basically big boxes is what they were making. Now, market for furniture isn't going to be very good for the next couple of years. Not too many people furnishing new offices or new homes. So how can this company adapt to the new reality and avoid bankruptcy? Well, the most obvious thing that comes to mind when it comes to cartons is e-commerce. That's doing well. So maybe they should look at making smaller cartons for e-commerce. Of course, that's a very competitive business. Maybe they should look at new distribution to get those cartons to their customers. On the other hand, it's always best not to look at the first opportunity that pops in your head or the most obvious thing that pops in your head. It's better to do a little more research. So how can this company learn what it needs to do? How can it efficiently focus its scarce resources? If it wastes its resources by jumping into the first opportunity it thinks of, it might get wiped out and miss a bigger opportunity. So what can it do? Basically, the issue is that most of your benefit and most profit comes from a very small number of opportunities. And these golden opportunities, unfortunately, are not colored golden on the outside. They're golden on the inside. So it's not easy to see them. You need to have and create an inventory of opportunities that you can choose from and evaluate. How do you do that? Well, it's not really that hard, actually, because all of us in business have a lot of stakeholders and people that we deal with who understand what's going on. And the best way to understand what's going on is by talking to people and learning how the crisis is affecting them. So you just need to ask questions. In my consulting, that's what I do. And everyone can do it for themselves. So you can talk to your customers' customers, if you're in B2B. your potential customers, channels, suppliers, employees. You should even talk to your competitors. And you should say, how are you affected? How are you adjusting? How are others adjusting? Where do you see people successfully adjusting? What do you need? What's missing? And how can we help? So you can learn a lot by picking up the phone and talking to people and asking these simple questions. In my own consulting, I have a 6-step process called the open mind process for uncovering, recovering, and discovering opportunities for sustained profitable growth. And the first step of this process is called the opportunity audit, in which I do something exactly like that. An audit is a picture of reality, and when you do a financial audit every year, you don't only count half your money, you count all of it. So it's good to do an audit of your environment by talking to people. And when you do that, it helps you to create your own opportunity inventory that you can choose from. So you can create your own COVID opportunity inventory. This is made up of internal opportunities mainly that will help you to survive. Things like cost cutting and efficiencies, balance sheet survival and revival, and business model revamping. Some of that might be for distance selling. And of course, external opportunities that can help you thrive. Things like existing in new segments, geographies, products and services, customers, channels, and suppliers. And after you've made this inventory, it's important, of course, to filter it and evaluate to get down to the smallest number of opportunities that you can apply resources to. I have a filtering model to evaluate opportunities. I start with the opportunities from my inventory. Then I filter it through key drivers of change, which is, of course, in this case, the main driver is the virus. And then we filter opportunities through value filters. There are 9 value filters. The most important is utility. And then through alignment filters, there are 4 quadrants of your opportunity environment, your mission, model, market, and domain, and they all must be aligned in order to execute properly. Of course, a talk like this isn't appropriate for going in this in detail, but my books cover this process in detail, especially my new book, The Power of Opportunity. So these are available on Amazon. That's the end of the road for this presentation. I'd be happy to take your questions now. If your question doesn't get asked during this period, you can always reach out to me by email, richard.rothman@opguru.com. Visit my website, opguru.com. I'm also on LinkedIn, and I have a lot of educational videos on my YouTube channel, OpGuru. So why don't we start the questions?
Thanks a lot, Richard. Very provoking session. Give a lot of food for thought on how to tackle this crisis.
Xerxes, I'm not hearing you that well.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's better. I think
Now?
you need to talk into the mic wherever
Okay.
it might be.
Yeah. So, I mean, thank you very much. It gave us much food for thought on how to tackle this crisis and how to emerge smelling like roses, hopefully. I have a few questions to start off with, and then I'll leave the floor open. I've not seen anything on the chat as yet. What is your take on the Indian economic model in these pandemic times? How we were one of the fastest growing economies before the lockdown came in. Now they are predicting a catastrophe of the highest magnitude because of our diverse economy and a lot of the sheer masses that we have. Do you predict a U-shaped recovery, a V-shaped recovery, a W-shaped recovery? What is your take on it?
Well, I think India is facing a very hard choice. It's like being between a rock and a hard place. Because if it continues to lock down its cities, it will face a serious economic catastrophe, in my opinion.
So what
on the other hand, if it unlocks a place like Mumbai or Delhi fully, there will be certainly a lot more spread of the virus and a much higher rate of death than there has been now. So I don't see an easy choice in that situation. I also don't think the Indian government has the fiscal room, given its high debt burden already, to spend a lot of money as the US government has. Given that India's rupee is a soft currency, it also can't massively monetize the rupee and print money as the Fed has. So there is very limited room for fiscal and monetary support because the government doesn't want to destroy the rupee. Obviously, it doesn't want to devalue the rupee to a point where it goes down to 100 or something overnight, which could happen. It happened in 2008 where the rupee fell 50% during that financial crisis of that time. So I really don't think there are any easy answers to the situation. And for that reason, I'm strongly suggesting that companies face the situation and focus on survival. This is going to go on for a long time, potentially, unless there's a miracle in terms of medical science. I mean, I'm not denying the fact that it could happen given the amount of resources being thrown at it, but it's just not likely. But if there is a miracle in terms of an RNA vaccine or something that can be produced quickly, okay, then that something can happen. But otherwise, I really think that it's wise to consider the situation to be bad for the next 2 years and go into a survival mode. Because I don't see anything positive. I know the Indian market is currently rallying, but you know, the best reason for that is that it went down before. You know, markets go down, they go up, but it's a hope rally. There are no economic fundamentals behind it. Things are not improving.
But, you know, Richard, I mean, what you're saying is correct. But as you know that, you know, after the lockdown was lifted partially wherever, we are seeing like direct delivery companies like Amazon and all saw their business surge 200, 300%. And I'm talking only of India right now. We are seeing everywhere where things have opened up, it's an overnight practically demand or recovery. So how do you think, I mean, do you really think that if we languish with our sheer size and mass numbers, if we just sit, if we are saying it's going to take 2 years for us to come out of it, we won't be able to serve, most businesses will not survive. And I'm talking 70 to 80% of them.
I fear that you're right. That's why I'm recommending that companies companies focus on survival and not be hasty in assuming that this is a short-term problem. Unless the government decides to do what Sweden did and say the hell with it, we're not going to take strong measures. We're going to reach herd immunity quickly by doing nothing. If India had done that, then I think their economy would be in much better shape, because in 6 months, everyone would have got the virus. A couple million people would have died and it would have been all over. Because of the intense nature of India's lockdowns, however, it's created a conundrum, because they have failed to flatten the curve, even with these intense lockdowns. And I think that's a structural issue. Indian cities are simply not designed for social distancing. It is impossible in cities that have 50 or 60% of people living literally on top of each other. It is simply not possible to have social distancing. It's not possible in cities where people have to travel in crowded trains. Therefore, I don't see that continued, even if you unlock to a certain extent. Let's say Mumbai is unlocked to a certain extent. This has opened up demand. Of course, there was suppressed demand because people weren't able to shop before. But there aren't too many businesses other than the e-commerce that have really gone back to where they were. What I can see at best is an economy that recovers up to 80 or 90% of where it was. I know that I've talked to people who should be doing well. For example, the owner of Cipla, who I meet quite frequently, he's only been able, and you know, obviously there's no limit on pharma. Their factories were allowed to be open the whole time. People don't stop needing drugs, and chemist shops have not closed. Yet he's only able to produce at 70% because his labor force, much of it has disappeared. The availability of transport is still limited close to most of his factories. And there's no reason why this wouldn't continue to some extent. Because, for example, transport simply isn't going back to where it was. And much of the economy that is impossible to have social distancing in will not recover anytime soon. So I see an economy, what the economists call at best the 90% economy, where you're still going to have at least a minimum of 10% of the economy that's flat on it, that's gone, wiped out. And a 10%, an economy that's lost 10% is still what you'd call a depression. It's going to suppress demand for almost everyone, with the exception of e-commerce. And even they have suffered. Even Amazon in the US is not making money, even with greater demand, because they've had to spend so much money to adapt to this, to protect their employees. They've had to spend something like $5 billion up front to do that. And God knows how much more.
Yeah, you're right.
It's not a simple thing. All of us face that. Reconfiguring all those costs of running with more people and protecting them is very expensive. So I really don't see too many people benefiting from this, unless they're in a purely, unless they're in a business like Zoom. And there aren't too many people in a business like that.
Even they may be banned in India soon, so we don't know how things will go.
I don't think they're Chinese, are they?
No, it's a Chinese owner, but born of American citizen.
Well, I certainly hope they're not banned. I haven't found a better alternative, to be honest.
Same here. Yeah. I swear by it.
Yeah.
So you said about the transport industry, and we have a question on the panel that from one of our participants. Do you recommend a logistics company should grow as there's more potential currently, or stay lean and careful by tiding over the crisis?
Well, I think everyone should be lean and careful. Unless you're in an industry, unless you have a business that's a true beneficiary like Zoom, I recommend conserving resources. And that includes transport, because unless you're a true beneficiary, I think the guys who are delivering Amazon packages and sending food and so on are obviously that type of localized transport may be benefiting. They're probably suffering because of lack of people. But if you're doing intracity transport or that sort of thing, that's bound to be tougher. I don't know. I'm not in your industry. Maybe it's better because there are fewer people doing it, or they're all having supply shortages, so maybe prices are going up. I have no idea. It depends on the dynamics of your industry. You might benefit. But whatever it is, I strongly recommend going into a survival mode, because the companies that survive through this crisis will be big winners. If you can make it through this period, you're going to have a really great playing field with fewer competitors and pricing power. There's no doubt after this is over, a lot of suppressed demand is going to come out. This is a period in which people are conserving resources. Saving rate in the US, for example, has gone up to 33%. I mean, Americans aren't known for saving anything. And the personal savings rate has gone up, skyrocketed, because everyone has gone into that sort of mode. And I'm sure in India, it's the same thing. So once it's over, there's going to be an unlocking of a lot of money. The people who survive will benefit from that. You have to survive.
But Richard, if we all just conserve and hunker down, how will we come out of this economic malaise that we have? I mean, they always say, no, I mean, even when the crisis was there a few years ago in the US, I mean, I remember the president saying, go out and shop, go out and spend your money. That's how you can kickstart everything.
Yeah, so, I think that was, he was talking to consumers.
Yes.
That's the reason consumers in America, all the unemployed people were given an extra $600 a week. I think in business, it's a little different. Okay. I'm not saying you shouldn't spend, but I think you need to focus on really carefully evaluating your particular opportunities. For me, for example, I'm seeing a lot of opportunities for my own business. I'm investing in marketing. I'm investing in digital. I feel that I can be a beneficiary because of the death. You could say the death of distance. Distance doesn't matter anymore
No, it
for
doesn't.
selling consulting. Now you have to evaluate your own business as far as how can you benefit. Do you benefit from this need to no longer sell personally?
Okay.
Or not? I mean, I think that's a universal thing that many people can benefit from, especially if you're in a B2B business where you had a sales force that had to go knock on doors. And how do you service your customers? If you're in a B2B business, even B2C, can you do it from a distance? Can you be more effective in servicing from a distance? Because I feel that people are getting used to this.
Oh yeah, working from home.
It's going to be more of the new normal. I mean, this wasn't normal in India at all, right? India was a place where you had to go sit with people and hold their hand and show respect. But I think after a year or two of this, people are going to say, the hell with all that. This is so much easier and more efficient. I think we need to start adapting to it now. Okay, not be a stick in the mud and get with it. That's what I feel. But it really depends on your business. It's hard to say flat out, this is how we should do it.
Okay.
Everyone has a different business.
What's your take? We have another question about what about the Indian exports? How do you see that coming out as government of India is trying to make the Make in India initiative and be self-reliant in light of the Chinese aggression, not only the pandemic, but otherwise as well nowadays. So what is your take on that?
Well, I think it's going to be almost impossible for India to simply shut down Chinese imports.
Over time, yes, but not immediately.
Well, I'm not sure it's really a good idea. I understand the political issues and so on. I think it'd be more useful for the country to do more things to become an alternate manufacturing hub instead of China. I think India isn't the only country in the world that's annoyed with China and realizing that they have to diversify their supply chain. I think there's going to be especially important in the pharma industry, for example, not to be reliant on Chinese APIs, which most of the world is. So there's obviously a big opportunity for Indian pharma companies to go into manufacturing APIs. And there are probably a lot of opportunities for other forms of manufacturing, but the government needs to permanently reform its labor laws, its land laws. It has to do a lot of things. Simply saying that it's going to be, that ease of doing business is better doesn't necessarily attract capital, because on the ground, the situation still isn't very good for foreign investors. It has to stop doing things like rewarding Mukesh Ambani by punishing Vodafone and Airtel, which is clearly a case of crony capitalism, right? It has to stop doing things like that. It has to stop having retroactive tax. It has to stop doing all these bad things that deter foreign investment and send foreign investors can have alternatives. They don't have to make in India. So I think
he's one guy who actually
I think a model based on import substitution where you're going to make here instead of China is foolish. I think India went through 40 years of that sort of model called the license Raj. I think it was a huge disaster. And I think it's a stupid thing to return to. I think India needs to have a model where it welcomes and encourages foreign investment and foreign manufacturing by reforming its laws and by no more punishment of foreign investors because cronies are bribing them.
I think that's going to happen.
What we see happening still even now.
That's going to happen now, I think, with what the new policies of the government. It has no choice, I think.
I hope so. I hope the government uses this opportunity to finally push through the kind of reforms that it promised 6 years ago.
Yeah.
If it doesn't, then it's it's pretty hopeless, in my view. This is the time to do it.
Yeah, one other person who did not stop from expanding and growing is what you mentioned, Mukesh Ambani hit his biggest 3 deals in the lockdown. It's something
Yeah, I mean, he's used this opportunity to sell shares in Geo.
Yeah.
So smart guy.
Smart guy. Taking advantage of that. That's what I think everyone needs to think out of the box during these times and do it accordingly.
Yeah.
Probably, yeah. So I think, Richard, last question before I end,
Okay.
and it's actually a little off the grid a little bit. When and how do you see this pandemic ending? Because everything is depending on that right now. When and how?
Well, there's only 2 ways for the pandemic to end. And I've talked to my mother about this extensively, and I've cross-checked with others who understand the science. The 2 ways are either a vaccination or herd immunity. There is really no other way. I just heard I was listening to a podcast from the US today in which a scientist was saying that the virus is mutating, and it's mutating to become even more infectious. Maybe not more deadly, but more infectious, because that's what viruses do. So the virus will, if there is no vaccine, the virus will over time become more and more infectious. Viruses are basically parasites. So if you die, they don't flourish. They don't really want to kill you. They just want to keep replicating. They want you to spread it. And they keep becoming more infectious as time goes on. So it's likely that the virus will just keep spreading. And more people will get it, but it won't be more deadly. And and that's the most likely scenario. I find it really hard to believe that the vaccine is going to be tested anytime. You know, I mean, even if you go into 3rd stage tests on a vaccine, which some vaccines are, those take about 6 months at a minimum, and they have to be tested on real subjects who either volunteer or already have the virus. It takes a long time. Many vaccines in the past have been rushed into production without proper testing, and they've killed people. So the minimum time period before a vaccine could be proven to work might be another 6 months, say the end of the year, with a proper 3rd stage trial. After that, vaccines take a long time to manufacture. They are not an easy thing. If you think about it, who uses vaccines normally? It's usually vaccines are given to small children. So the world's vaccine production is mainly based on the amount of newborn children every year, which is far, far, far below the number of people in the world. This is a vaccine that needs 8 billion doses to be produced. It might be that the vaccine requires more than 1 dose. Some vaccines do. So to produce enough vaccine for all these people and actually distribute it and give it to people is going to take a long time too. Which is why, you know, best case scenario of 2 years is highly realistic, frankly. So it's much more likely that herd immunity can be reached where everyone basically gets the virus. Eventually, the virus will become more infectious. People will get fed up with lockdowns. Lockdowns will continue to destroy the economy, and they'll have to be opened up. There's no choice. I mean, India is going to have to open up. They're going to have to start running the trains in Bombay eventually. How long can they keep them shut? And when that happens, everyone will get the virus. And a lot of people will die, and then it'll be over. So that's what I see happening. I mean, herd immunity, I think, is the most likely scenario. And in a couple of years, the virus will burn out.
The herd immunity without such casualties would be welcome, but anyway.
Well, I mean, so far, according to, nobody knows how many people have really gotten the virus. You know, the reported cases are only probably 1 in, the best guess is there are 12 times more cases than the ones reported.
Yeah, yeah.
So if 10 million people in the world have reported getting the virus, then actually maybe there's 120 million who got it. In India, there's about 7 lakh cases reported. So maybe there were actually, I don't know, 7 crores. What would it be? 7 lakhs. It might be not 7 crores, certainly. But I mean, there's a long way to go, obviously.
Yeah.
Only a small percentage of the world has still got the virus. But as economies open up and have to stay open, then a lot more people will get it. And apparently the actual death rate is supposedly around 1% globally. In India, it might be lower because the population is quite young.
Yeah.
So if everyone in India got it, it might cause 1 million deaths at the most, something like that, which is pretty severe, but
I understand. Yeah. So just
unavoidable.
before we end, any words of advice to the WZCC on how we can grow this chamber and help the community and society at large? You know the Parsi community for a long time. You
Yeah.
have been close to them as well. So any last words of wisdom before we go wind up?
Well, I encourage all Parsis to have lots of children.
We're working on that, all of us.
I think you're a great community, but you need to have more children. And as far as how many members does your chamber have now?
Well, I think Asfi, would you like to say that? I really don't know about the WZCC's membership.
I think the best way a chamber can grow is by doing useful things for its members. Having and adding value, you know? I think focusing on how to add value is very important and really attracts people and younger people and so on. That's what I think.
We are trying to encourage the youngsters in the community to turn towards business, just like our forefathers did.
Yeah.
Build great empires. We are trying to do that.
I think a lot of the community has become professionals.
Yeah. The entrepreneurial spirit or the zest has been, it's coming again. It's coming back again slowly and steadily.
Yeah. I think in any way that the chamber can help mentor young Parsi entrepreneurs, that would be helpful.
Yeah, we are doing that in a very small way. We are doing that. We are even giving them initial startup funding, etc. Doing all that. Yes.
I have another presentation I'm doing for Thai, the Indus entrepreneurs, that's more focused on opportunities for entrepreneurship. So I'd be happy to do that if you had a group of Parsi entrepreneurs.
Oh, we would love to do that. We'll take you up on that for sure. So thank you once again, Richard. Really appreciate it.
Pleasure. It's a pleasure always.
Yeah. Can I request Persis to give the vote of thanks, please? Thanks, Richard, once again.
Thank you, Xerxes. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, and if you can share your presentation, I think a lot of our members would be interested.
Of course, I'll send you. Have you recorded this Zoom call?
Yes.
Will you be sending out a link?
Yeah, we will. Yeah.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
Thank you, Richard Rothman, a lot for your insight, especially on, without mincing words as to what this pandemic is taking us and where it's taking us. We will have to survive the 2 years one way or the other. And thank you. The fact that, we have to cap onto the distance selling, and that's the best opportunity for now. And we just hope on a positive note that all of us can overcome and tide over this period, and take your advice and go step by step as to how we can get there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank all of you.
Thanks, Richard. Thank you very much. Stay safe,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.